everyone. I'm Rachel Nelson, Director of the Institute of the Arts and Sciences, and we thank you for joining us today. Today's event launches a series of talks, film screenings, dance performances, and concerts on the theme of Afrofuturism, which will take place over the course of the academic year. The series is organized with music professor Carlton Hester and professor of performance, play, and design, Gerald Cassell. And I'm joined by Aaron Malenga, who'll be moderating the conversation today. Aaron is an artist, writer, and educator who works with us at the Institute of the Arts and Sciences. He's also a graduate student in visual studies at UC Santa Cruz. Aaron has taken a key role in not only this event, but also in the series based on his own interest in Afrofuturism, which informs his art practice and his research. I'll let him tell you more about that. But first, I will just quickly say that I'm grateful to Carlton for gathering this group of artists, dancers, performers, and theorists together to talk about what Afrofuturism means and how it manifests in cultural practices. There's a lot to talk about, so I'll bow out now and rejoin for audience questions later. And as you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A and we'll pick them up. Aaron, I'm gonna turn off my screen.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Hi, everyone. As Rachel said, my name is Aaron Samuel Malenga, and I'm a PhD student in visual culture at UC Santa Cruz. As Rachel also mentioned, this event is the first in a series of talks, dance performances, and music performances that will take place over this academic year, which we are calling Surge. For Surge, we are defining Afrofuturism as a wide-ranging social, political, and artistic movement intent on imagining a world where African-descended peoples and cultures can live and flourish. And for periodization, we are thinking, at least in part, of Afrofuturism as conceptualized in the 1950s in the United States by cosmic philosopher and jazz giant Sun Ra, and the work that he and others did to imagine a world free of oppression. As we also hope this panel today will show, many people in different parts of the world have been dreaming about a world without oppression leveled against Black people. Afrofuturism does not have national borders. I'm an artist and a writer. My art practice draws inspiration from the concept of Afrofuturism as it was realized through the Zambian space program, which Mukuka Nkoloso started in the 1960s. This was at the cusp of Zambia's independence, when it was still called Northern Rhodesia. Nkoloso dreamt of taking Zambia to Mars. One must consider the magnitude of such a dream. This individual, based in a colonized country in Africa, was proposing space travel, while many in the country were thinking about industrialization and liberation through capital. Nkoloso was thinking about a different kind of liberation. He dared to think about a freedom that transcended physical borders. I'm engaging this history of space travel on the African continent, not only because it widens the context through which we often think about technology and space travel, but because of how Nkoloso evoked a different cultural heritage through which to imagine the possibilities of space. In the US, space travel has been linked to realms of domination, imperialism, and power. In Nkoloso's evocation of Afrofuturism, though he may have called it by a different name, he imagined a future where Zambians could be space explorers, which was and still is a radical revisioning of the world. So with the legacy of Sun Ra and Nkoloso both setting the stage for what follows, I'm happy to be here today with India Cooke, Mandjou Kone, Emmanuel Etolo, Charles Tolliver, Nelson Harrison, Rahman, Jamaal, with the concept of Afrofuturism, providing us the opportunity to think together about how the US can interact more deeply with Africa to imagine a world where the oppression of Black people is not the starting point of our conversation. At this point, I'd like to ask our panelists to turn on their cameras. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you forgive me if I don't offer formal introductions of all of you, as listing all your accomplishments would be quite time consuming. Instead, to get right into it, I'll ask you to introduce yourselves and to talk about your relationship to Afrofuturism. And I hope you will also take the opportunity to define what Afrofuturism means to you. I would like to call on India Cooke to open our discussion.
Hi, everybody. India Cooke here, talking with you from Oakland, California. It is such an honor to be here, and I thank you all, Carlton Pfister as well, so very much for the invitation. I'll get right to it. I am a violinist and teacher by profession. This year I'm celebrating my 21st year of my teaching studio here in Oakland. That's India's Music Room. And I must say that for me, I think my greatest joy is teaching. And we can talk more about that later in terms of Afrofuturism, but that is certainly one of the, I think, greatest stepping blocks in Afrofuturism, that we continue a legacy moving towards what we perceive as a future, or what we dream to be a future. Anyway, I was born and raised in North Carolina, Durham to be exact, and I had my formal music training at the North Carolina School of the Arts, which is now called the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and also University of Michigan. And then immediately traveled west to San Francisco, and here I've been ever since. When I got to San Francisco, and that was in the end of the 70s, I began playing in the pit orchestras for the touring shows coming out of New York, the Broadway shows. And it was during that time in the 70s where there was a big surge of Black musicals that were happening, from Pal Joey, 78, actually at the time that was with Lena Horne and Josephine Pramis, to Timbuktu. These are the resettings of classics like Kismet, you know, Timbuktu with Eartha Kitt. All of these shows were coming in, and it was just a marvelous welcome for me to be in that environment. I loved playing in the theater, but I was also, as a freelancer, playing in celebrity shows, Stevie Wonder, those kinds of shows, Patti LaBelle, Donna Summer. But it was also during the disco years. So a lot of strings were being used at that time as well. So that was a lot of fun, and a great fortune for me to be able to play in those musical experiences. Also, I played in symphony and opera, local symphony and opera orchestra. So I just kept really busy as a violinist. But also at the same time, there was another movement happening that was absolutely marvelous, and that was the loft scene, where musicians would get together, you know, pretty much in casual situations, you know, someone's home, or sometimes, you know, a performance venue, but there would be, you know, the musicians getting together essentially to have a jam session. And that is actually where I met Carlton Hester, and we began to, you know, perform, play together. So it's been a long, wonderful musical relationship. And again, Carlton Hester, the professor of music at UC Santa Cruz, also the shepherd of this event. Thank you again, Carlton. Also during that time, I started working with George Sams out of St. Louis. So these were real pivotal moments for me, because I was so used to the very structured world of essentially classical-based music. And so when I started in that circle of improvisational musicians and playing, it opened up an entirely new and marvelous world for me. And in a sense, I could call it, well, I could just call it a godsend, because it was for the first time for me that I actually felt the soul of the music and communicating. And using that word communicating, I mean it in a literal sense, the sense of community. That was really the first time that I felt it. And that to me was so freeing. And that is going to, we'll talk about that more as well when we talk more about Afrofuturism specifically. And from there, I suppose I should talk a little bit about Sun Ra and my work with Sun Ra. That was in the late 80s that I met Sun Ra. And I have to tell you this story, folks. Now, we are only given a few minutes to speak, but I think this is important. And so if you need to cut me off, cut me off. You know, the Buddhists, or so I've been told, say that there's no such thing as a coincidence. And so people ask me, India, how did you connect with Sun Ra? And my answer is this: my cat got me the connection. My cat, my furry cat, got me the connection. And I'll tell you what happened. He was very, very, very ill. I had tried everything, taken my cat to every vet I knew, and no one could help him. I started doing crystal work, energy work, dream work, everything, because this cat was my best friend. And he was on his way out for sure. I saw an announcement in the paper that Sun Ra was coming to town to play at Concepts Cultural Gallery. That's in Oakland, California. I have never in my life, or I still haven't ever asked anyone to sit in on a performance. I'm much too shy for that. I just never really had the confidence to do anything like that. And I'd never played professionally jazz or anything or improv. I'd only, played like in the loft situation. Okay. It was some kind of divine something. The next thing I knew, I had my violin and my amp, and I walked into Concept Cultural Gallery with my violin. And I saw one of the musicians from the orchestra, and I said to them, "My cat is dying. May I play with Sun Ra?" And he looked at me kind of like I had 14 tails and walked away. And that was that, just left me standing on the side of the room with my violin and my amp. And the next thing I know, they had all gone into the green room to get Sun Ra and brought him out in a processional to the front stage. Those of us who are familiar with Sun Ra, we know that it's always a processional. They went up and they set up the orchestra and they started playing, the drums started playing. It was just magical. And so I figured, I'd done what I was supposed to do, and that was that. So I'm listening to the music, just getting into the feel of the music, just swaying with the rhythms. And the next thing I know, I get a tap on my shoulder. And it's one of the musicians, I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly who it was, who said, "Sonny wants you up front." And I said, "Oh my goodness, what do you mean?" He says, "Yeah, come on." And I said, "Well, I have my amp." He says, "I'll take care of all of that. I'll plug in, just get your violin, let's go." I must tell you, it was the most transcendent, transformative, mind expansive, consciousness expanding experience I have ever had in my life. To hear that music around me was, I don't know the other words to use for it. And then there was also Wisteria. She was the dancer who was like a beautiful tornado going through the room. It was a beautiful experience, and I'll stop at that and go back to my cat, whose name was Sriwan Jati. Something moved me to try one more time to get him to a doctor. And so I did. I found another vet in Berkeley, California, and I took him to this veterinary hospital. They took him in the back. I was in the waiting room. And then one of the doctors came out and said, "Your cat is going to be just fine." They found that it was a simple infection that they were able to clear, and he lived to be a great old age. I do believe in magic. I think that was magic in one of its greatest forms. And so that is how I met Sun Ra. That was the end of that. It was a beautiful evening. I enjoyed playing with them, went home. end of story, until maybe a couple of weeks later, I got a call asking me to please tour with Sun Ra. And that was the beginning of my touring and recording with him. We did two recordings. One is Pleiades, and the other live at the Hackney Empire. So, one of this, in introducing, there was a question that's asked of us, and that is what Afrofuturism means to us. And I believe that's correct. Let me look at this. What Afrofuturism means. And when I looked at that, I said, well, I really need to know what the definition of Afrofuturism is. And so I, scoured the internet looking at definitions. I talked to friends and family, what do you think? What is Afrofuturism? So here is one definition that I found. It says Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic, philosophy of science, and philosophy of history that explores the developing intersection of African diaspora culture with technology. It is a movement in literature, music, art, etc., featuring futuristic or science fiction themes, which incorporate elements of Black history and culture. Okay, well, I came up with my own definition too, but before I even do that, I have to get back to Sun Ra. Sun Ra was a messenger. He considered himself a Saturnian. In other words, he felt that he was from Saturn. Now, I believe that. I mean, I would imagine that many people would have a difficult time wrapping their heads around that. But he felt and knew through his consciousness, his expansiveness, his understanding that he was a part of this multiverse, this megaverse. And he was a metaphysician. He was a teacher. He bridged not only Afrofuturism, but the meaning of the word Sankofa is, go back and get it. This is what Sun Ra did. He connected us to Egyptian mythology, to the history of Africa. And this music is all of that. When we listen to that music, it is Afrofuturism. It's not about just the costume. It's not just about the electronic frequencies of music you hear. It is about the consciousness that it is born from. So I came up with my definition, and it goes like this. If I can find it, let me see. It says, visualizing, creating with intention into and throughout the perceived future, utilizing the lens of the African diasporic experience, past, present, foreseeable, and unforeseeable futures, tapping into the concepts of metaphysics and of dimensions of the metaverse and of the multiverse, sharing our ideas through our art on promising new ways to build and experience an extraordinary new world. Now, I'm still working on it, but that's what I got for now. And I think I can offer on to the next panelist.
Thank you so much, India. Really do appreciate you sharing. I'd like to call on Nelson Harrison to speak next.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for sharing the planet at this time, because it was a shared frequency that brought this group together. And for me to have a group of people who are even discussing the experience of this frequency is quite a thrill. And so I'll just give you a little bit of my journey to this particular point. I started playing music professionally when I was 13. I had learned a little bit of trumpet, and then they stuck a trombone in my face, and I picked it up pretty quickly, and I started private lessons so I could learn how to play the instrument. But when I was even smaller than that, I didn't realize that music meant more to me than just something you listen to. We had a piano in the house, and I would reach up and play the keys when they were above my head. When I started teething late, I bit all the ends off the ivory keys. and I was loving those sounds and playing around with sounds. Also, my father had some recordings of Duke Ellington and Earl Garner and different jazz players that he'd play on our record player, which was one of those big consoles, and the 78 records, which were very fragile. And I used to like the music so well, I would try to climb inside, and I would pull the console over on me when I was about 2 years old. They'd have to get me out from under it. But what I found out later was I remember all that music. And I wasn't a musician till, I didn't know how to even talk about music till I was about 12. But I remember all the sounds I heard when I was 2, 3, 4, and 5 years old. So music was so personal to me that I wasn't trying to be a musician, but I couldn't get away from it. And fortunately, my older brother and his friends started a band when they were 14. I was 12, and I got to be in the band. It was a 13-piece band, and they didn't have a trombone. So we wound up playing the Glenn Miller book and playing some dance charts and playing some Count Basie charts. And boy, just the combination of those instruments and being able to be in that context was quite a thrill to me. And dreams started happening because as I learned the names of these people, also from the radio stations that were playing jazz. I first heard Miles Davis in 1947. I never heard a name like Miles. What kind of man have a name like Miles? And at that delicate sound on the trumpet, I just thought, I got to follow him. I got to follow him. So I was seeking out these personalities that were making these great sounds, never knowing that I would ever meet some of these people and even get a chance to play with some of them in later years. But the frequencies were just always part of my consciousness. So as I began to meet these people and listen to them live, and I did stumble on a Sun Ra record when I was a teenager, and I listened to him and I said, wow, this is even beyond bebop. There was a competency there and there was a frequency there that I just said, I got to follow this guy because I don't know who he is or what he's talking about. And then in my later years, when I was maybe 19 years old, I started studying metaphysics. And I've been studying that all the rest of my life since that time. And that took me into some other frequencies of humans on the planet. And I got to meet some people through that channel. And then as I was a pretty competent player when I was in high school. We played the whole classical repertoire in my high school. In fact, they didn't have any watered down music for students. So we were playing the same charts that the symphony was playing. And so I had a chance at 15 to join the Pittsburgh Symphony Junior, which was a countywide competition. I won the trombone chair and we sat side by side with the symphony members, but it was the same music we were playing in the high school music room. So it wasn't hard. And so we did that, and following year, our high school orchestra won the state championship. That's how well we played. And so by the time I got through the classical experience at age 17, I knew the whole repertoire, but it was kind of boring to play because I was also playing jazz. And jazz was a totally different dimension. And I knew the difference because I knew that I own that music and I'm risking my life on every note I play. And it reaches inside of you, like India was saying, it does something different for your consciousness than reading a manual that somebody else made the decisions on, which is what sheet music is. Now, I love listening to classical music and I love listening to all music, but the playing part of it, it's just another thing, like Art Blakey said, it comes from the creator through the artist to the people. And he said that's as high as it gets. So that became my trade. I never went to a music school or anything like that, but music was my trade. Now I knew I wasn't gonna make it my profession because musicians weren't making any money. And I also wanted to be a music therapist because I learned about the therapeutic application of music when I was a teenager, when some of my mentors would take me to the vet's hospital and play for the patients, and I could see how the music just transformed them. And I wanted to be a music therapist, so I decided I was going to be a doctor or a psychiatrist, and I was going to become a music therapist. Well, then when I got into academia, I found out they didn't know anything about music or therapy. So I got as far as a year of med school, but I found out that what the academic world was doing didn't even touch what I was looking for. But Sun Ra was doing what I was looking for. And the other jazz musicians that I looked up to and idolized, they were doing what I was looking for. And it took me a while to realize that entertainers were music therapists, because they reach directly into you and make you feel better. And academics didn't get that, because they were still putting sheet music in front of people and calling it music therapy, and that never worked. So I got a chance to play, when my early 20s, I got a chance to play all the Motown acts. I played every act except Patti LaBelle, the Jacksons, Four Tops, and Marvin Gaye. I played all the rest of the acts, Stevie Wonder, Temptations, all those things. We played the Supremes. When they were their first tour they made in 1964, the Supremes and the Temptations came to Pittsburgh with no sheet music. And they were just the kids from Detroit. We didn't know they were going to be famous. And we had a quartet with an organ, a sax, a trombone, and drummer, and we played their show. And that's how I first met that. Then a couple of years later, they started to get real famous. You know? So having that experience, and then about 3 years later, I got a chance to play with James Brown. I played with him in 67, 68. And that was another kind of experience. And then, of course, some of the jazz icons that were coming through. Ray Charles tried to hire me a couple times, but I was in school, so I turned it down. The bass player was from Pittsburgh, and he said, "Hey, man, you're still in school. I got a seat for you in a band," and I turned it down. Count Basie called me when I was in graduate school in '73 and offered me Al Gray's position in trombone section. I couldn't quit school because I was almost done, and I turned him down 3 times before I actually went. And when I went, it was in '78 when Fred Wesley from James Brown's band, I had met him in '68. He called me up and he was leaving the Basie band. He said, "You want to come in and finish the tour?" And I was teaching psychology at Pitt. And I said, "Yep." He said, "Can you be in New Orleans in 4 days?" I said, "Yep." And I was making $12.50 an hour teaching and shrinking heads at Pitt. And I left my class. I called my buddy who was assistant dean. I said, "Finish my class, I'm out of here." And I met them in New Orleans. And the first time I sat on the bandstand was for 60 Minutes and Dan Rather and Helen Humes. And I said, I just made history. I'll never make history as a psychologist. So I never looked back. And so I stayed with the Count for a couple of years. I did a couple tours and we went to Japan and things like that. But what I learned in that context, and we're talking about frequency, that the level of music they were playing was so far beyond anything I had ever done, because it made you, the vibration, the Count had an aura about him that he would come out on the stage and you could feel his aura envelop the band. And you never knew what the next song was going to be because they never rehearsed. They never rehearsed the one time. And they never play the charts the way they're written. So if you're not in the sound about sheet music at all, the arrangements would change and nobody would discuss it and it would be played perfectly. And it makes you high as you can get. Well, I realized that it was beyond the physical abilities to be able to do that. And some of the other members of the band, I'd hear them say, "I can't play like this outside of this band." It was a magical kind of thing. And it was him, the Count. He knew what he was doing on the keyboard and he ran the band by sound. And so then also I got a chance to play with the great Kenny Clarke, who changed the way drumming happened in jazz. So when he came to Pittsburgh for a couple of months, I got a chance to play with him in a combo. And then I got to I played with Earl Father Hines and Billy Eckstein, and Art Blakey sat in with us one time. And so I was in that mix. And that's where musically I always dreamed to be. But because I had the other background of the science and the metaphysics, I was able to put all that together in terms of a philosophy. And jazz became the template for the way I live. Because you have to risk your life on every note you play. And if you play a note you didn't intend to play, you have to fix it forward. You can't go back and fix it. And fixing it forward, that's what you have to do with life. You have to fix it forward. You can't go back and redo it. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. You can't do that in life. So then one last thing happened to me that I didn't expect to happen. And this was before I went with Count Basie. I was playing with Nathan Davis, who had the jazz program at Pitt. I was in his combo. And we were playing a club job, and the drummer happened to be J.C. Moses, who was from Pittsburgh originally, but he had played with Eric Dolphy and John Coltrane. One night he said to me, hey, Nell, I want to turn you on to something. I said, what? He said, man, you did all that technical shit. Why don't you let the spirit play? And I said, well, okay, turn me on, right? So we were playing, and Nathan Davis liked to play like Coltrane. He liked to play he's very highly technically skilled, and he liked to play his soprano sax like Coltrane. He started a tune playing My Favorite Things, and he practiced it all the time, and I never practiced. I never practiced since I said, I don't even have the chops to get up behind that. But I said, what the heck, I'll get up and play a couple choruses and sit down. Well, when I got up to play, JC said to the piano player, lay out, Vince, let me have him. So the piano player quits playing. And I put my trombone up to my face and I started to play. I always closed my eyes because we used to practice in the dark all the time. And my lips started to go numb. And then the numbness went all up around my nose. And I couldn't feel the horn at all. And all of a sudden I separated from my body. And I could hear the people screaming. I could hear music in the background, but I was a center of consciousness. And there was something going on that I couldn't physically get in touch with. And he kept me up there for 6 choruses. I could feel the precipitation sort of get a little denser until I could actually feel the horn in my hand. And I pulled the horn away from my face. And I looked at him and he said, yeah. And I said, oh my God, this is a whole other thing here. And from that point, I understand that music can take you there. It can take you to that dimension directly. If you tune up sound-wise, not sight-wise, because sight doesn't process music. Sound is the ear processes music, and the ear goes into the brain, and the right brain processes that. It's the doorway to the inner self. Okay, so I'm experientially very familiar with that, as well as we can talk about it forever. I met Carlton in 1999. We were at a conference down in Birmingham with Donald Byrd and Larry Ridley and some of the other jazz greats, Jothan Callens and James Johnson and Consuelo Lee, Spike Lee's aunt. And we were going to form a thing called the 21st Century Jazz Congress so that we could establish the real power of the Afrocentric perspective in the context of all this academic music school stuff that was going on with the jazz educators around the world. And we were kind of ticked off about that. So that's where I met Carlton. We happened to be sitting beside each other. And Carlton said one word. And we were elbow to elbow. And I said, yeah. And I said another word back to him. And he said, yeah. And we've been on the same frequency ever since. So that was another way the frequencies of consciousness bring us together. And whether he and I talk for months at a time or whatever, there's no time passing between us. It's like the ever present now. And so I'll stop with that, but
Thank you so much for your contribution to Harrison. I'd like to call on Mandjou Kone next to give us her definition of Afrofuturism and also introduce herself. Mandjou, are you able to hear us? All right, it seems like her camera is frozen, so I'll let her speak after the next speaker. Could I call on Emmanuel Etolo to share? And Etolo is with his son, Jonathan, who is going to interpret for him.
Good evening, everyone. My English is not good. I'm sorry, but my son will translate you.
Okay. Yes, you can go ahead. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Etolo Emmanuel, visual artist, sculptor, mosaic. It is a pleasure for me to be here, to be able to discuss a subject that brings us all together. So good evening, everyone. I'm the translator of Mr. Etolo Emmanuel. Okay. Before talking about my relationship with Afrofuturists, I will start by defining what Afrofuturist means to me. Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic that combines both science and philosophy specific to Afro culture, but also it is an adaptation of a culture to a world that continue to evolve and change because of the events that affect it. Punching. Why a science? Because it brings together a set of universal knowledge. Know how that can be expressed. Several artistic disciplines such as music, visual art, still photographic, while celebrating of originality and innovation. Turn back culture. In fact, Afrofuturism advocate in innovation, the development of the Afro culture, tongue, art, and technology, its use, art and technology, and means of expression. It eludes the change in life and to the landmark on which culture and its barriers are notably spatial and temporal are located. Okay, that's for the first question. He has tried to define the Afrofuturism, and now we will talk about his relationship with the art and the Afrofuturism. As for my relationship with Afrofuturism, I practice a traditional art which consists of working on a material called obum. We have obum there, and we can show you obum.
I'm not sure if the video has frozen, but when they come back, we'll give them a space to speak again. I just want to point out that Etolo, I believe, is in Congo, and our next speaker, Mandjou Kone, is in Burkina Faso. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to invite her to speak next and introduce herself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Carlton, for having this meeting. I feel like they're speaking at the same time. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
My name is Mandjou Kone, and yes, I am in Burkina Faso right now. I came to visit my family. I live in the US, in California. My parents came from Mali and immigrated in Burkina Faso here, and I was born here. I was born into a family of griot. Griot people are historian. They keep history in music, in artifacts, in dance, and even braiding hairs. I'm gonna back up a little bit. There was a man who refused to go to Vietnam in the 60s, and he decided to come to the Peace Corps, and he met my family. My father and his brother, they were playing music. He fell in love with the music. He went back to America and asked his father to buy him a camera so he can follow these people. This was before I was born. So, and in the 75, I was born, and he documents everything. Griot, when I was a kid, we didn't have TV, but I was happy. My grandfather would tell us stories. That was my TV. And after telling us story, they would tell us the history of every last name that we have and what the last name comes with. When I say that is what they did, the first person did, how good they were. And they took turn. My grandfather, my father, my dad had 3 wives at the same time. So every night, everyone take turn teaching us. And daytime, we go to school. It's all in his documentary. The documentary, by the way, is called Great, Great, Great Grandparent Music. Daytime, we go to school. And on Saturday and Sunday, we accompany our parents to go play in weddings, in naming ceremonies. And sometimes when there are so many parties to go, I would go with my sister to go play for the kids to dance. This culture is very important. Because of griot people, we know the history of West Africa most. And to me, Afrofuturism is something very important. Without music and the spirituality in the music, it doesn't go. The music we play, we do everything with music, whether it's birth naming, whether it's funeral, even to cleanse the village. Once a year in the village, they will cleanse the village, and there's a certain songs that they will play. If anyone has some spiritual beings with them, they will be possessed and they will start talking. And whoever is not clean would leave the village that day. So this is done by music. Also, we evoke spiritual beings to also come. And during funeral as well, they will play a certain song. Whether the dead is dead a year ago, the dead will come and tell the village what they need to do if there's a sickness coming or famine coming, or if they can't move to the next level, what they need to do. All this is done by music. So when Mr. Nelson was saying that music is, you don't make money by doing music, it's so true. But without music, this world cannot be held together. Anyway, so My name is Mandjou. Did I introduce myself? I'm sorry, I'm like jet lagged and all here. I'm a singer, songwriter, and an author. And I met Carlton at the music department. I teach there once a year. I teach dance at the theater art. So, griot people supposed to be talking well, but I'm the last griot. Anyway, so pass it on to, are they back?
Thank you so much, Mandjou. We really do appreciate you contributing and sharing what you have. I'd like to call on Rahman Jamaal to share his perspective. Introduce yourself and share your perspective on Afrofuturism. Thanks.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Rahman Jamaal, and this is Sun Ra in the background. Actually, the story behind this painting is by an artist named Magic in San Jose, and all of his artwork is around the sun and the sun god. He's an incredible artist. He creates in 3 dimensions, meaning if you put 3D glasses on, his paintings pop out. He doesn't really know how it happens, but he's a savant when it comes to his creation. And he actually did all the artwork on my latest album release. This is my first solo project called The Book of Ra. And all of his artwork is all through this. And I introduced myself with that because, like what was said before, this conversation is very much a culminating moment in my own life and self-understanding in relationship to Afrofuturism. I feel like since I was named at birth, there's been information seeking me, or that I'm meant to seek, for a creative purpose and a mission. And in becoming aware of that, for example, just the meaning of my name, I grew up, a lot of people pronounce my name a few different ways. I grew up as Rahman, but also Rahman, but the actual pronunciation in Arabic is Rahman. But I always had a connection to something going back to Egypt or the sun god, like my name in Pig Latin, Amen Ra. That was something that I held on to as a kid, like, oh, there's some connection there. And I didn't really realize what that connection was. And as I've grown into an adult and the experiences that I've had through music and the opportunities, really is really the loudest marker of that this unfolding of awareness and information is guided in a way beyond something any of us can control. We can just align with it. So I'm a hip hop artist. I'm an actor. I again have been afforded so many opportunities, and being the type of person that grew up around both privilege and the opposite, being a bridge between those experiences and those lifestyles of between the people that I know is always been a part of my journey. And right now, working with Carlton, also am an executive director of a nonprofit called Hip Hop Congress, which has been around for over 25 years. And like Dr. Harrison was talking about, jazz being his calling, hip hop, or I would say, I won't even say hip hop at this point, because my understanding is gone beyond New York's narrative, even back to the narrative of my own hometown, my own home area being the Bay Area in California. So at some point, I'm going to read a poem that was sent to me, and I don't know how it reached me, but it connects Afrofuturism to California in a very unique way, one that I wasn't aware of at all, but the research checks out. So Afrofuturism has a connection to California, as I'm learning. Us being here as part of this forum and symposium is a process of that. I will just say that the best way I can describe Afrofuturism is through an example. A lot of people have heard about the Mayan calendar, and there's a big thing about 2012 and it being the end of time. And if you talk to people who study the Mayan calendar, you know that they're speaking of time as a mental construct, the end of time being that we're not living in history, we're not living in the future, everything is present, all the information is here for us to work with. So it's not like a matter of, if you don't have access to certain information, you can think that time unfolds a certain way. For a large part, the Western Christian church has dominated our concept of time, even to the degree of the year that we all agree that it's 2021. Well, what year was it when when Jesus was alive? What year was it? Right? If the calendar that the time stamp that we use on history, human history, is based off of the life of a person, what was time like when that person was alive was a question that came up for me and recently, and come to learn that there are many calendars that humans have used over history, and one of the oldest is the Kemetic calendar from Kemet, from Egypt. And if this has some of the oldest documentations of human civilization, from music to martial arts on down, a lot of the things that we still are seeking today to reconnect with. And if you go by the Kemetic calendar, we're in the year 6263. I think 2020 was 6262. So we're essentially living in the future right now. We're living in the year 6262, depending on which calendar you choose to organize your time by. And I find that to be a very interesting example of how futurism is a concept. The past is a concept. The only thing that we can ever really grasp is the now. And if that now is an eternal unfolding that we're just coming into subjectively, well, then it's going to feel like time. But when we get to a point of collective consciousness and understanding all that is out there in the true structures of the universe, we're also trapped in a dimension of time that is very much determined by white supremacy, the antithesis of African consciousness, right? So we're in this battle currently in this moment of figuring out, navigating a reality that has been taught to us by an enemy of humanity, to keep us focused on things that will keep us trapped in time. So it's a process of consciousness evolution. And I think that there's the next generation running by. It's a consciousness evolution. And we're at a point now where a lot of these concepts that Sun Ra was putting out there years ago are, we need enough teachers that can be able to understand, wrap their minds around these ideas. And a lot of that times that means that our teachers need to also be artists, because artists are the ones that go within themselves to figure out these answers and bring them to the world. So we're at a very exciting time, in my opinion, and that to me makes it clear why Afrofuturism is is still an attractive concept, and still probably hasn't met its collective potential yet, but except through the people that are exploring it. So, but I think it's here for the world, and I think it's here to stay and help us all find ourselves.
Thank you so much, Rahman, for your contribution. And in fact, that sits very well with the next question that I have for us. So certain words have resonated with me as central to what brings us together in our concepts of Afrofuturism. Words like spirituality, collectivity, consciousness, these words seem to repeat across all your concepts of this ongoing tradition in music, dance, and art. This is not always the way people conceive Afrofuturism, which has been taken up by some thinkers and artists to think about the roles that technology, particularly new and future developments in technology, can be used to work for liberation. We could think about some elements of the 2018 Marvel movie Black Panther, which made Afrofuturism go to a new level of mainstream in recent years. And so for my next question, I would like us to think together about how Afrofuturism transcends our understanding of time. And what is it about Afrofuturism that allows us to reach into the past, into the future, and the present all at once? I'd like to call on Mandjou to share her response to this question.
I had myself muted. Yeah, like going back to basic. If we go back to basic, that will help us a lot. What do I mean by going back to basics? Let's acknowledge our ancestors. That's one. Let's accept that we are not alone. That's another one. Let's also respect our words that we speak. Let's respect and put, yeah. So Afrofuturism for me is that going back to basic, acknowledge the trees, the water, the animals around. Like in my culture, everything we do, we invite the ancestors that are underground to come with us and fortify us. And how do we do that? It's simple. We don't need blood. You just take water, you pray on it, and you put it on the ground, saying, ancestors, I'm doing this, come with me and help me. And if you are clean, a good person, you always have help from them because we are not alone. So I think going back to basic is because for some reason we have lost touch with ourselves. And someone deliberately did that so they can further manipulate and get us separated. So that's what I have.
Thank you for your contribution, Mandjou. I would like to call on Dr. Harrison if you'd like to share your response to the question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think first of all that Mandjou's absolutely right and Rahman was absolutely right. We talk about and I didn't say this before, but the oral tradition is far superior to the written tradition because it involves the totality of our existence and it involves the living stream of consciousness of our tradition. It's not been materialized and packaged in some kind of way that it can be manipulated and propagandized and all that kind of thing. In order to receive the information in the oral tradition, you have to first respect the source of the information. If you don't respect the source of the information, you probably won't get it. And we have such disrespect for higher frequencies in the Western world, on purpose, as everybody recognizes, that's one of the diseases that we're perpetrating on the planet. I didn't say that part of my background, I forgot to mention, I didn't study ethnomusicology, but I was a personal student of Chief Fela Shawandi of the Yoruba when I was in graduate school. And he was my personal mentor. And he wrote about, we used to do seminars on African consciousness and things of this sort around the country. And he was just one of the most, well, we can talk about him later, but I do have some of his personal works that I hope to publish soon for us to share, because he gave me the secrets of African music and African culture, because we were both in that frequency of metaphysics. That's why he chose. And the African culture, and what you said, Mandjou, scientifically, I can give you a backup to it, because water has consciousness. And if the culture knows that water and nature has consciousness, and therefore you respect the consciousness of the environment that you're in, that environment responds to you the way you respect it. And we have separated everything so much in the Western world that all we see is separation. We don't even understand connections. And I can demonstrate this with IQ tests. I do it with my students all the time. They can't even find a common denominator between any two aspects, like a chair and a table. And I ask them to find a common denominator, they can't do it. But they can tell you what the details are. And so the Western world is dying from the details that compete with one another and destroy one another, instead of the common denominators that harmonize everything, including our personal identity. So we are right now doing genocidal things on the planet Earth because of our complexion, which is totally ridiculous, because is that who we really are, our complexion? Or is there much more to us than that? But the same people that are blaming our complexion for X, Y, and Z are ignoring our consciousness, which is everything. And so when you start with consciousness, all the separations are just the diversity of the beauty of the nature, and you can relate to a plant or an animal or anything else, because it's also us. We all share the same consciousness. We are all one. And because we are all one, that respect of each manifestation of the universe is a self-respect. And here the Western world has no self-respect anymore. We're so busy building weapons to destroy, because we don't understand we can only destroy ourselves. And so we have to have this consciousness that's coming from the Afrofuturism perspective to reach the minds and the consciousness of the people that we interact with. If not, they'll destroy us and then go to Mars and destroy Mars. I mean, it's silly, you know. We have multi-billionaires, and instead of them helping what's holding them up, they're taking trips up into space for a few minutes, like they're doing something, but they won't help anybody that is in need, because they think they're separate from that. And so, but I teach my students about the consciousness of every element. There is no element in the universe that isn't also conscious. And the common denominator of us and the stars and the plants and the water and the rocks and everything, there is nothing in the universe that is not conscious. In 2012, they discovered dark matter in the universe, which is 96% of the universe they've been ignoring for thousands of years. But they had to come to the conclusion that it is conscious. It's conscious, and it is determining where the stars and the other so-called visible bodies, where they are positioned. They're positioned in a context of consciousness. There's no empty space out there. There's no such thing as empty space. It's just what we ignore, and we have the nerve to call it empty because we choose to ignore it. So, I mean, everybody who's spoken, and what Rahman said about the now, and I mean, this is it. To be conscious of knowing that we have the power as individuals to extend our awareness into a context, label it, reduce it, and crush it. And we'll find out that the consciousness is more powerful, because there's sciences out right now, like cymatics and all that, will demonstrate to you that music organizes matter. Okay, so physicists used to say that, well, entropy disorganizes matter, but they never came up with, until recently, what organizes matter. Sound organizes matter. In fact, a rock is nothing but a crystallized piece of music. Everything is singing in the universe at a frequency, even a black hole. They say the nearest black hole plays a B flat 54 octaves below our hearing. Everything in the universe is singing a song, and we can be involved in that song consciously. We don't have to be physically involved because our consciousness reaches beyond our skin and beyond anything else. So we're all, I'm just thrilled to have this gathering here, and I'll shut up right now.
If I can pop in off of that, because I have a story that's an example again of how this consciousness can flow into your life to bring you to places. So there's a book that I was given by a artist named Doug Infinite from Chicago, and it's called The Mysticism of Sound and Music by Hazrat Iniyat Khan, who is a Sufi mystic, very famous in his day. And his whole philosophy, what this book is about the law of harmony, and that everything in the universe is held together through harmony.
Absolutely.
And we can either, and we can control our own harmony, our own vibration. So we can either, harmonize with our environment or not. And just his realization of being a musician, mastering his instrument to the point to where he's no longer playing his instrument, but he's playing life. He's playing people, like he's tuning people as he goes through life. Like this level of awareness that music can give you alone is already on a higher dimension of understanding and awareness. And so, but it has to be experientialized in order for us to learn it in a lot of ways. You can study it from the outside, but it's like anything, like knowing is not enough, you must do. Bruce Lee, right? We have to apply this knowledge to discover its true power. And I find it interesting because when Doug Infinite was telling me his story, he was a hip hop head from Chicago. He did it all. He's a skateboarder, b-boy, DJ, opened up one of the first record shops in Chicago. And he was also taking a college class, and he wrote a paper on the power of hip hop and how it brings people together organically, describing what that experience is. And his professor, after reading the paper, called him aside after class and said, is all of this stuff that you've written, is this true? And he's like, yes, this is my life. I just told a real true story from my life. And she said, well, can you mentor my son? He's about 13 and he's really into this stuff, but I don't know how to guide him. And he's like, yeah, sure. No problem. And so she starts dropping his kid off, and the kid's a sponge. He starts just soaking in. How do you do this? How do you do that? He's just learning. He's just downloading so much information. And the world knows this kid today now is Kanye West. This was Doug was a catalyst for that. And a lot of the work that I do with Hip Hop Congress is about just that. It's a network of people who all have experiential knowledge of the same thing, the metaphysical experience that music can have on you as an audience member, how sound organizes a crowd, how sound organizes us around it, and what type of organizing you can do around it. So right now, we have the first educational initiative that is allowing artists to get a teaching credential to teach their cultural art form in school, starting with hip hop. But what we're talking about is Black consciousness, again, getting back into the school system through the teaching artist, which is something that we lost in the 50s, and we lost our Black teachers with integration. That's a kind of a controversial statement to say, but integration didn't work for everybody. A lot of our knowledge that got cut off at that point, our ancestral knowledge from our elders passed on down. And I think that's what we're also experiencing today with technology. There's a huge generational gap. And so there needs to be some sort of cultural expression or base of knowledge that reconnects all of those strings. And from what I've seen, this is it. This reconnects all the strings if you have enough time in the day to go down the rabbit hole.
That is so well put. I mean, one of the things you said about inside out versus outside in, that's a big thing, because if the experiential part of it isn't there, you can't know anything until you experience it, and then you own it. But if it's outside in all the time, you never own it, because you never identify with it. You never think you're connected to it. And it's been known throughout history that when you want to enslave people, the first thing you do is get rid of the music. It was known back in Confucius's day. And if the emperor in China wanted to check things in the provinces, he didn't go out and check the books or the other aspects of the society. He checked what music they were playing. And if they were playing the right music, he knew everything was cool. But if they were playing the wrong music, he knew he had a problem. And anybody who's really studied the esoteric history of humanity, like Mao Zedong, he knew that. And the first thing he did to take over China was he slaughtered 20 million people. He outlawed music and burned musical instruments and stopped it. Joseph Stalin did the same thing. They got rid of music. As soon as you get rid of music, you can enslave the human mind. And in 1980, Ronald Reagan did it when he started taking music out of the schools. And the school, huh?
Would you mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
I apologize for that. I'd like to just bring back Etolo into the conversation. I think their network is stable now. If you'd kindly share your response as well. And I think we have just a bit of time for one last response from India Cooke as well, before we open up to the public. So Mr. Etolo, if you would jump in.
Sorry, their network is not going on well. So please, I would like to come back with the first answer of the first question. Okay, so the way it was to define the Afrofuturism with the concept of Mr. Etolo. Okay, I will start. Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic that combines both science and philosophical specific to Afroculture, but also it is an adaptation of a culture to a world that continues to evolve and change because of the events that affect it. Why a science? Because it brings together a set of universal knowledge, know-how that can be expressed through several artist disciplines such as music, visual art, stylist, photography, while celebrating originality and innovation, through Black culture. In fact, Afroculture innovation, the development of an Afroculture through art and technology. Its use art and technology as means of expression. Okay. We will answer the second question now. Okay, just give me. Okay, Afrofuturism it highlights evolution and innovation through technology, because through technology evolution we can flourish the future. Sonra, inspired by technology evolution to highlight innovation, Afrofuturism does not only allude to technology. Afrofuturism transcends our understanding of time. It draws its straight from history, from the milestones that have had an impact of Afroculture fact that involve this culture to the evolution. The culture existing today are based on primary primary culture that already convoyed was a life evaluating that culture carry with the employers of past. The past is the very essence of Afrofuturism because it's trance of evolution of Afroculture through history, a culture that is inspired by their ancestral origin. The story we can interpret that is a space journey, temporal by the channel of the art which evolving informed on their history. Okay. Afrofuturists relate the evolution of Afroculture through his history, but also emphasizing the contribution of the Black people in the development of the current world.
Thank you so much for your contribution, Etolo. I'd like to call on India Cooke, if you could share your contribution as well.
On va revenir sur un aspect après.
India, your mic is off. If you could unmute yourself. Yes, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
but to follow up from Rahman and Nelson, simply put, I could say it takes a village, and just mirror that with collective consciousness, that if we as people of the African diaspora could realize the capacity of the energy that our brain has, and collectively our brains have, that we could expand our consciousness to a point of infinite possibility. How do we do that? That takes some study, that takes some knowledge and some trust that this is an actuality that can happen, that this is Afrofuturism, that we have the capacity to heal, to move from this unfortunate, almost a paradigm of the plundering of a planet. It's just like Nelson was saying, it's ridiculous what's happening to this planet and how long this has been going on, and it can be stopped. Some people may think, oh, it's too late, but if we can raise our consciousness, expand our consciousness, and do this in a way that we can come together, community, village, that's what it is. I see art, and we've been talking a lot about music, but we're talking also visual art, fashion, literary art, scientific arts. All of this is a part of this. And we can see it as a time machine. These modems can take us wherever we want to go, wherever we want to be. Now we have this kind, as Rahman was saying, we have this false understanding about this thing called time, that there's a past, there's a future. Well, it's a concept just to help us keep our sanity and to organize ourselves. But really, life is in and of the moment. Quite honestly, what we're doing here today has already been done. It's past, well, whatever, it's done. But we're here for all intent and purpose in our mind and thought, talking about this. So in terms of Afrofuturism and time, it's about our being able to expand our ability, our brain ability, our consciousness to move forward futuristically, if you must. I have a problem with the future thing, but yeah.
Thank you so much, India, for your contribution. I'd like to call upon our director, Rachel Nelson, to give us the questions from the audience.
Hi, everyone. That was a fascinatingly interesting conversation, and has brought up some interesting questions from the audience. And I think one of the ones, India, because you just called it back forth, I'll start with, which is a question about what consciousness means and about what you mean by what we mean when we use the word consciousness, and whether it includes the idea that humans have a responsibility to care for and take action on the consciousness of other things, or is it important just to understand? So I know that consciousness is a word that has a long history. So if you want to.
Okay, well, I would like to defer that actually to Nelson. That's the guy who should be explaining consciousness.
Okay, the first thing is our identity. We are human beings. Second to being is doing and thinking and moving and all the other things that we do. We are a being, and it's the I am identity that is universal. It is timeless, it is spaceless, and it's all powerful. But we don't identify with it. We identify with the activities of the being, and we're identifying with the outer being. I mean, body identification probably is the greatest sin of human beings, because we identify ourselves with something temporal like the body, instead of realizing that we are not temporal, we are eternal, and that we cannot die, and we existed before we were born, and our consciousness is not limited by the third dimensions of time and space. We're not limited in our consciousness, and therefore the power of our consciousness is greater than the power of nuclear weapons, as India was indicating. It's greater than these so-called external powers. And when all these external powers can do is to destroy the body, but the body isn't who we are anyway. I mean, Mandjou was talking about the ancestors. They didn't go anywhere. They just went to a higher frequency, but they're still present. And our being is universally present. And when we operate from that perspective, there's no limit to the impact that we can have on anything. And I think we all agree to that. And it's been well put by India and Mandjou and Rahman. And, we are understanding this. But we know that as a group, it doesn't take a large number of people, but it takes a group of conscious people to hone in on a frequency. And that frequency changes the outer world of time and space. And have you guys heard of the 100th monkey syndrome? There was an experiment in the South Pacific where there were some monkeys on an island, and one of the monkeys decided they ate sweet potatoes. One of the monkeys decided to wash the sweet potatoes before they ate it, wash the sand off the sweet potatoes, and something they had never done. And so the other monkeys start copying this monkey. Well, when about 100 monkeys started doing that behavior, which wasn't an instinctive behavior, the monkeys on an island 500 miles away started doing the same thing. Now, they had never met the first group of monkeys ever, never seen them. But the consciousness, the universal consciousness of a frequency, somehow they tuned in on that and started doing this behavior that they had never done before. And the world is a small place. If we use the power of thought, as we all have said, and we think the result that we want to manifest, it will manifest, because the universe responds directly to our thought and our emotions and our feelings. Directly. We don't need permission. We don't need to tell anybody about it. We don't need money. We don't need any of those things. We just need to change the frequency level of our thought. And the physical world is a result of that. The fact that we're seeing the physical world destroying itself is a result of people doing their thinking. Well, we can reverse that, but we have to do it on the same level or a higher level than the problem.
Could I break in here for a minute? Nelson, one of the books that I've started reading is Alice Bailey's The Consciousness of the Atom. And I just want to read a couple of words here. It says, the atom emerges as a minute but complete replica of the energy structure common to all forms of life, cosmic, planetary, human, and subhuman. Groupings and relationships are shown as they exist on a small and on a vast scale within the evolutionary process, and the effects of energy interplay on the whole structure of consciousness. It's, again, it's so immense and vast. Infinite, I think, is the word.
It is. Now, what's the date of that book?
This particular book, hold on, I will give you that date. The publishing date on this was the first printing, or the fourth printing was 73. The first printing was in 22.
Okay, so I could tell because they're talking about the atom. That's before they knew what the atom was made of.
Yeah.
But you
Are
check
we talking
today,
about quarks? Are we talking about
the
quarks?
quantum physicists now have gone all the way down to what they call the Higgs boson element, which,
Right.
and they say that is, they've been always looking for the building blocks of the universe, but the materialistic perspective from the outward in doesn't understand that the building blocks come from the intangible. It doesn't start with the tangible, it comes from the intangible. Our thinking can heal a body. Our thinking creates the hormones and the chemistry of our body and the physics of our body. Our thinking is the determinant of anything that happens in the physical world, including manifesting things. I mean, anything we do today as human beings was a thought before it became manifest, right?
Right.
Well, why don't we understand that it came from thought?
But we're not taught that.
Well, but we have to do some learning outside
Yes.
of what we are taught, because we're not really taught, we're conditioned.
Yeah.
You know, we are trained and conditioned not to think
Correct.
and not to
Yeah.
be aware. So we have to overcome that.
If I can
And-
jump in a little bit into that, in the tradition, African tradition, we usually say that be aware of the person who doesn't like you and send you bad thoughts. They're very dangerous. So that comes into what you're saying, Nelson. Our thoughts are very powerful, you know. So you don't need to, yeah, carry on, please, just to add on. And, yeah,
I heard somebody say that, okay, well, there's around 50 trillion cells that make up our avatar, we call the body, okay? And we have thoughts, we're talking to ourselves all the time, whether any sound comes out of us or not. We have self-talk, right? And those 50 trillion cells are listening to what we say. And we get up in the morning and we say, oh, I feel terrible, I'm going to have an awful day. And 50 trillion cells are saying, oh, is that what you want? Okay, I guess we'll have a terrible day then, because that's what you seem to want. Why don't you like us? We're here to serve you. Or you wake up in the morning and you say, oh, I'm going to have a great day. Boy, am I glad to be alive and all that. And the 50 trillion cells say, yeah, let's go do it. Yeah. We're programming the very thing that we complain about.
Right.
And because we do it irresponsibly, because we don't know we have the power to change it the way we want it to be. And so we're all saying the same thing. We do have
No.
the power.
I'm just going to say that, I mean, I think that one of the things that's amazing too is that we all can sit here and think together and be here together from Burkina Faso, from Cameroon, from California. That, I mean, I think that this has been a really amazing moment of us coming together to really think about the power of thought, the power of collectivity, what it is to listen to each other, and how these ideas move across different times and spaces, and how amazing it is to have this space. We are pretty much out of time, and I know that there is two things. India, somebody asked for your definition of Afrofuturism. So maybe you can share that with us after this and we can send it out to people that attended the event, because it was lovely. And then I also want Rahman to have a chance to share his poem. So if you want to do that now, and with all thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks everyone. Yes, so this is not my poem, but I have the honor of sharing it with everybody. I said earlier that I received an email from someone new that I had never met before, and I had assumed that I had been referred to them by Carlton and the team that put this event together. But in doubling back, found that nope, nobody knows how they found out about this event. But the poem is from a prisoner, someone who is currently incarcerated, but has been very prolific in not just as an artist, but not just as a poet rather, but as an artist as well. Sorry, I had this queued up, and now I'm looking for the the tab that I had open on it. Give me 1 second. And is it possible for me to share my screen? Because I would also like to share their artwork that goes with this poem.
You should just be able to share. That should be fine, I believe.
Okay, excellent. All right, I'm gonna pull this up.
I just want to say that I think it was Wanda Sabir who put this person in touch with you.
I see. Okay.
Wanda, if you're still here, maybe you can verify.
Who are you speaking with?
Wanda Sabir.
Are you
That's
speaking?
Carlton, our invisible friend. There we go.
All right. So you can see here, this is the artwork that was created by C Note, who is also the writer of this poem. On a journey long, long ago, Afrofuturism was long sought. The maps of its existence were misleading, like the maps to Wakanda. But she, a student at an HBC, found the truth. Afrofuturism would not be found in Africa, but California. Like the raiders to the lost ark who sought God's covenant, so too Spanish conquistadors sought the Califia, the queen of the land of Black women. She ruled with a saber-toothed scepter, adorned gloves from the mammoth's wool. She nursed the earth's oldest and tallest trees in the forests of redwoods, invited the blue whale, earth's largest mammal, to suckle her young. Off her coastal waters. I'm gonna pause. So much better. All right. Run it back. She nursed the earth's oldest and tallest trees in the forests of redwoods, invited the blue whale, earth's largest mammal, to suckle her young off her coastal waters. In ancient times, her queendom fed the world. In modern times, it's called America's richest farming region, but she, a student from HBC, just like me, prayed to the Queen Mother at a place known as Nob Hill in San Francisco de Assisi, is enshrined a mural in a hotel for 1%ers. The Califia spake to our dear sister in a way only understood by feminine energy, and so she wrote, as only a scholar can, the map of Afrofuturism. It did not lead to Wakanda in Africa or the East where the sun rises, but in the West where the sun sets. In America, will Afrofuturism nurse itself in the queendom of the Califia, California?
Thank you again, everybody, so much for joining us today. Thank you all for all your wonderful thoughts. It was a real pleasure, and I know that the conversation will continue. Carlton, too, you should turn on your camera. The person that brings us all together.
Is it on?
Yes, thank you, Carlton.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone for showing and contributing. This was wonderful, and I knew that I shouldn't speak because everyone's going to be on the same frequency anyway, so it'd be redundant. Everything that I would have expressed was expressed.
Well, thank you very much, Carlton.
All right, bye, everybody. We'll see you
Bye-bye.
soon. Thanks so much.